So, what is intellectual luxury? The intellectual luxury framework is the highest form of capital, assets, and luxury that we could have, no matter the industry that you're in. My name is Fradali. I'm a research scientist with a social science background, currently developing my computational social science practice, and I work at the intersection of culture, business intelligence, and research. As a researcher, I view knowledge capital as the ideas, the frameworks, the creative, and the scientific ideas and work that we can only produce as human beings. In the age of AI, this distinction matters more than ever, and I'll tell you why in a couple minutes. But before we can talk about intellectual luxury, we should get honest about what luxury means, especially in our current society. The word luxury comes from a Latin word called luxuria. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. It means abundant. And by extension, it's always spoken to the sense of indulgence that we can have. And every culture kind of has their own version of luxury. In Spanish, lujo. In Italian, lusso. That means that luxury can be translated and span across languages, cultures, and geographic locations. So the Latins were right. It really does mean abundance, because that is one thing, no matter where you are, no matter who you are, and no matter what language you speak, you understand what abundance means. Scholar Patricia Calefato has noted that luxury is multi-discursive. It cannot be introduced as a set definition into every context, meaning luxury is not a fixed thing, although we're sold that it is. It is relational, it is contextual, and it evolves with us. And here's what that means for you and me. If luxury is contextual and we live in a knowledge economy, then the most luxurious asset one can hold is our knowledge. But not just any knowledge, new knowledge. It's one of the things on why I love research so much. You can't just publish to publish. You have to actually create something that fills a gap in the literature or in the societal issues at an intersectional level. You have to be able to see that there's a gap in what someone is experiencing or a community is experiencing or what we're experiencing in our knowledge economy to ensure that new knowledge is being produced that will move society forward. But you don't have to be a researcher to understand that producing new knowledge can be one of your most luxurious assets, because we are all producing new knowledge and sitting on it. 9 times out of 1, new knowledge, because it is filling that gap, shouldn't depreciate. If anything, it's going to appreciate, because you're not only filling a gap that really serves society or maybe era that we're in, right? Also being able to leave knowledge for the next generation to come to do better, or to be able to use your work in the future to have better solutions. What makes new knowledge a luxurious asset is that it can't be copied. You can really produce what you want to produce. Is not to be oblivious that plagiarism exists, because that is a real thing across all industries in so many different aspects. So now that we understand what luxury is, what is intellectual luxury? Intellectual luxury is the triangulation of creativity, research intelligence, and business acumen. But at its core, it's knowledge. The first pillar is creativity. And fashion is one of those industries that got this right. We've been seeing brands steer away from logo-driven consumption. A lot of fashion experts are calling conscious or considered luxury. Now, through a researcher lens, I'm seeing the shift toward valuing the knowledge embedded in the actual making of the garment, right? So behind that garment, you're understanding that the knowledge, not just the fabric itself, is built to last for decades, not just a season. And we see this a lot with social media. A lot of smaller brands or just really talented artists are actually bringing us in, and we're actually learning the process that it takes to some extent to really get a final product. Even if it is just 50 seconds, it feels like we're in the process with them. And I think it's not just a visual thing, but it's the level of inclusion and belonging we can feel, especially if we're not in the same field or don't have the same talents. This actually allows us to be roped into the community that the artist or the fashion brand or the business owner is building. In my opinion, this is a newer development in the knowledge landscape as a society, because we live in a knowledge ecosystem. Knowledge will never be outdated. So the mastery of the artists themselves, the deliberate sourcing of fabric or material, everything from mood boards to maybe archival history of the fashion fabric or idea itself. In my opinion, what we're finding interesting and actually luxurious about this process, we're seeing the knowledge embedded in what they're creating. And I believe it's because we're placing value in the combined expertise and creativity of the artist. So what does fashion have to do with creativity in intellectual luxury? It's actually a prime lesson in luxury itself and how it evolves with us as a society, because artistry is part of the creativity. But while fashion and beauty has named the aesthetic intelligence behind this, what I'm building names the intellectual dimension. And the build of intellectual luxury actually spans across research, science, business, culture, and even archival work. Because intellectually is not just about the object, it's about the expertise that we can bring no matter the industry that you're in. So you're probably asking, well, how can intellectual luxury combine all of those things? And that's a really good question, because research literature speaks to the fusion of creativity and scientific discovery. When you can combine the artistic and scientific creativity behind a discovery or new knowledge, the main pattern across fashion, creativity, researchers, scientists, philosophers, when it comes to this pillar, is time. Luxury always requires time. The ability to actually sit with the question instead of rushing for an answer is what some of the most greatest philosophers, researchers, artists, and scientists have done, because they understood taking your time and finding that answer and curating it is another form of wealth. And honestly, something AI cannot replicate. And this form of wealth and luxury, when it comes to the way we produce knowledge, is what we risk losing as a society if we solely prioritize speed and efficiency over depth and inquiry. So you see, in intellectual luxury, as a framework, creativity is not a decoration. It's actually a research methodology. So let's talk about pillar 2, research intelligence. Now, there's no single formal definition of research intelligence, but it doesn't mean it can stop us from having the discourse around what research intelligence can become. Research intelligence, as I use, is you actively following and mapping your curiosity. That means tracing questions that matter to you. In doing the research and following your curiosity, intellectuals, collaborators, or other people who simply hold expertise that can give you a different perspective on the questions that you're asking yourself or the things that you're curious about. In my opinion, I think research intelligence requires something that research and development no longer does, and that's human positionality. And it's not that research and development doesn't prioritize human positionality, but since we're in the age of AI, we're seeing a lot of researchers and experts use AI in a way that's been backfiring. And in my opinion, research intelligence is going to be one of those things that's going to be able to stabilize and still bring credibility and legitimacy to the research and development space across industries. Because research intelligence is how knowledge moves, especially when it's treated as relational and not transactional. But at the end of the day, research is still research, right? So research intelligence still needs to be organized and systematically used when collecting data or insight. But since research intelligence is still not a formal definition, I would make this addition that research also encompasses cultural truth, community voice, and knowledge production and preservation of all three. That's the part of human positionality that it would require from start to finish. Because regardless, research is the bridge that many leaders across industries use to understand what the data says. So who is the data speaking about? Who does the data speak to? Who does the data impact the most? But in research intelligence, in the human positionality that we bring, who is missing from the conversation, not just the data? I believe research intelligence can become a subset of just research and development as an applied process. What knowledge ecosystems are we erasing and from whom? Is that going to make us more intellectual as a society if we have less information to understand? Is that going to help us build better bridges and working with one another? These are the questions, in my opinion, that a research that really holds will ask. And in my opinion, with researchers moving more towards AI, this is actually the space where AI falls short. And here's the thing, it's not because AI isn't powerful. We're already here in the age of AI. And when I talk to other researchers, a lot of people say that AI speeds up the process. It speeds up analyses, it speeds up scaling ideas, and they're right. But one thing AI cannot do is hold positionality. AI cannot be held accountable to the communities and the information it processes from these communities, whatever community it's speaking to. But a lot of communities that are culturally driven are layered, complex, and have a multitude of languages in history and understandings that AI simply cannot hold in positionality, cannot fully understand, or replicate in innovation or idea creation when it comes to these particular ideas around community. Here's an example. In 2025, there was an AI conference. Over 100 confirmed citations were actually AI hallucinated. Across 53 peer-reviewed articles were found. So papers written by the very experts who have the intelligence and the resources in the community to speak about these systems or their topics didn't hold their greatest asset, their positionality within their research intelligence. And in my opinion, research or research intelligence that requires human positionality, it doesn't make us any less than the tools that we use. So maybe what makes research intelligence different from research in general, it's that checkpoint in making sure that human positionality is brought throughout the research process, start to finish, not just in collaboration with stakeholders, but an internal checkpoint with ourselves as the expert of whatever knowledge we want to produce. Last but not least is business acumen as a third pillar of intellectual luxury. The research literature describes business acumen as the comprehensive ability to understand how an organization operates, what drives the performance of the organization, and how decision ripples across finance, markets, strategy, and operations. You know, it's real when I pull out the iPad. PMI's 2025 Pulse of the Profession report names business acumen as a critical driver of organizational success, specifically the ability to shift from tactical execution to strategic partnership, connecting cause and effect across a whole system rather than inside a single function. So, what does this mean? Well, business acumen can be understood across 4 sectors: financial literacy, strategic thinking, market awareness, and research and development. With financial literacy and business acumen, you're actually able to understand what drives growth, profitability, and value creation. With strategic thinking, you have the ability to build plans that actually work at a system level, not just at the task level. Market awareness is about knowing the external landscape that you're trying to drop your product, so you make sure the decisions you make can actually survive the contact with the market, aka the reality of someone and how they can feel about your product or your concept. Last but not least, and honestly my favorite part, is research and development. You see, R&D is the analytical capacity to form connections across different insights that without using R&D as that bridge, you actually wouldn't understand how all the puzzle pieces come together. So what's business acumen inside intellectual luxury? So the goal with every pillar, from creativity to research intelligence and business acumen, understanding how knowledge moves. Because business acumen can actually tell us how knowledge gets created, codified, distributed, and converted into value. And oftentimes, business acumen requires you to ask one of the most expensive questions in a conversation. What knowledge does this organization or institutional space actually hold? And what do we mean by that? Well, in business, just like in research or even in corporate spaces, we often focus on what we don't have. What data are we missing? Who are missing in the room, right? But actually, we also need to understand and take inventory of the knowledge that the institutional space actually has. And understanding that it may have limitation when it comes to knowledge because of the way it defines knowledge. That's the beauty of intellectual framework. Creativity, research, and business acumen is actually teaching us how different forms of knowledge moves, because all these different forms of knowledge embedded across communities, cultures, and the diaspora teaches us that there is not just one form of validated knowledge. So, how am I crafting intellectual luxury through the understanding of creativity, research, and business? Well, research intelligence can actually be adapted to business. From the model, strategy, and knowledge production a business can decide to use, while also ensuring that the artistic integrity and scientific creativity is infused across the entire process. Because no matter your industry, knowledge is the biggest asset and should be treated like the capital that it is. So, let me bring this back to you. The question has never been whether you have knowledge or not. The question is whether you have the infrastructure around you to protect, evolve, and preserve the knowledge that you create in community, in culture, and honestly with your own artistry. Just understand that the knowledge you produce is not the only output. It's actually your capital as well. And it's understanding how that knowledge, that capital, is being treated in the spaces that you're in, whether that's your job at an organization, the business that you're creating, the PhD or master's that you're thinking about getting or are in, or simply by you and the relationship you have with your own knowledge capital. So I want you to walk away with this, if nothing else. Intellectualism, knowledge, is truly the highest form of luxury. Producing knowledge that you're curious about is something that you can do now. And if you enjoyed learning with me today, please drop some comments below and subscribe, because I would love to hear your feedback and your thoughts regarding intellectual luxury and what you view as luxurious. Bye for now.